To this week's Vinous Live with your host today, Neil Martin. And today we're staying in Bordeaux, but whereas last week we're on the right bank in Pomerol, this week we're moving over to Margaux for our special guest, Emmanuel Cruse. Emmanuel, welcome.
Thank you, Neil. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Where are you at the moment?
I am officially in the tasting room where I have a big screen in front of me and I could clearly see you.
That's good. And how is we were just talking just now, how is the situation? We're all in self-isolation still. How is the situation in Bordeaux?
Well, as you probably know, the official lockdown in France is up until next Monday, so May 11th. In terms of business, all the wine merchants are slowly but surely moving back to their offices and are asking for samples. And I think they did a little bit of sales anyway, especially with Far East Asia. But otherwise, it's Bordeaux is quite a dead city. Compared to a normal this normal period of the year.
How about in the vineyard? How's the vineyard work and social?
The vineyard, that's the very good point. So far, the vineyards are in very good, healthy condition. We are probably between 2 and 3 weeks in advance to a normal year. I'm terribly sorry because some of our friends from the right bank suffered from hail storm recently, but yesterday everybody was a little bit, angry because we were supposed to have a big storm near Bordeaux yesterday evening, and finally nothing really happens. We have only 2 millimeters of rain yesterday evening. So that's, not too bad, actually. So, well, situation in the vineyard is okay. The blend of the last vintage is already made. So now we are waiting for going back to a normal life, if I may say. Even if it's not going to be normal, but...
Yeah. I thought what we'd do for this broadcast is, in the first part, just find out a little bit more about yourself. And then we'll talk a little bit about Chateau d'Isson and the properties that you're in charge of. And at the end, we can have more a general discussion. And if anyone's watching this, they can ask questions and we can ask to Emmanuel. So feel free to ask questions. Yeah. But just start off, Emmanuel, you come from a famous family from Bordeaux. Can you give me a little bit about the history of the Cruse family?
So if we go back to the first Cruse that arrived in Bordeaux from Northern Europe, it was part of Europe which is south of Denmark or north of Germany, depending on the war between the two countries. So when he arrived in Bordeaux, his name was Hermann Cruse, so a very German origin name. And he came as a wine merchant in 1813, and he was based in Bordeaux as a wine merchant, and that's how the family established in a way as wine merchant at the early beginning. And then they start to buy a few chateaus, because at that time it was the best way to get the wine, I mean, or the juices or the berries to make wine. It was to be also a chateau owner, and at that time the chateau were in a very bad conditions.
What era was this, Emmanuel? What years are we talking about, and which chateau?
We are talking about 1850s. Around that, a little bit before the famous 1855 classification. And the first estate that my ancestor buy was Chateau Loja, which still remain in the family. It's my cousin Vanessa Cruse. She's in charge of it. It's a Cru Bourgeois. It's in near L'Espar in the really northern part of the Medoc. And then, but the most famous probably chateaus that the family acquired during this period were Pontet-Canet, Rozon-Seglar, and the last one that my grandfather bought just after World War II was Chateau d'Isson. So in fact, it was really a family that established in Bordeaux as merchants, and more specifically wine merchants. And they made, well, the first one has made his fortune with a kind of bet on the 1847 vintage, when he has decided to buy all of them, well, all the production of the major chateaus, you know, when just way before the harvest, and it happens to be a great vintage, and he has made his fortune like this in a kind of bet.
In 1847, you said?
It was the vintage 1847, yes.
Right.
But up until early 80s, the family was really more established as wine merchants, but of course, again, my cousin still is the owner of Chateau Loja, the first chateau ever bought by the family. And my other cousin that you probably know, Annabelle from Chateau Corbin on the right bank, is also the owner of this chateau. And my family still remain owners of Chateau d'Isson, and I have another cousin which is also owner of a Cru Bourgeois called Chateau du Taillant, and Chateau La Dame Blanche for the white wine. So now we have moved to more the other side, I mean, more to the production side, even if for example, my brother is still a wine merchant, and I have some cousins that are also wine merchants. So now the family will be 50-50, if I may say, in the wine industry production, but also in the wine merchants company.
And you grew up in Bordeaux?
I grew up in Bordeaux, and to be honest, I was, I would not say afraid of traveling, but I hate traveling because I have a very bad experience when I was 14 years old, and I went to UK, you know, in an exchange, and it was, it's funny now, but it was a bad experience. So I was afraid of traveling, and as you know now, we are traveling all around the world quite every month. So it's
You
always
mean on the plane?
Yeah. But I've also, when I was 17, I had a great experience with a wine merchant in Bristol that you have probably met before he died, John Avery.
Yeah,
and I was working in the cellars as you know, a student, and it's I've always this in memory. It's the first time I have ever tasted a bottle of Chateau Latour. It was in Bristol with John Avery during a dinner at his home. He was receiving private clients from Australia, and as I was staying with him, he told me, "Oh, the Bordelais guy, just let's come with me in the cellar and pick one of the bottle." And finally said, "No, I'm going to choose something that you probably never tasted before," and it was a Magnum of Latour 64. So I've always this story in mind, and I was so pleased to come back to the cellars the day after, where I met the fellow guys that were working with me at that time, and said, "Oh, what did you have yesterday night?" I think it was a good wine. It was Chateau Latour 64, and they were very jealous, as you could imagine.
Have you tasted that wine recently?
No, to be honest, no, not recently. But I've been to Bristol last year for an event in memory of John Avery, organized by the Commanderie de Bordeaux in Bristol, and I was very pleased to meet again with all the family. I mean, with Sarah's wife and her daughter and all this family.
So you always, was there pressure on you to sort of follow the family tradition and go into the wine industry? Did you ever think you wanted to do something else?
To be honest, no, there is no pressure. And I have to say that my grandmother introduced me to wine at the age of 5 or 6.
Is that your first memory of wine?
Yeah, a tiny drop of wine in a big glass of water. My mother was completely upset. I will be an alcoholic at the age of 10. But anyway, I survived, and no, I was, which is funny, is probably on the other side. My father rather preferred me to be a lawyer, international lawyer, rather than being in the wine industry or wine business, because he said, well, it's going to be very difficult. The situation has changed. It's not anymore. So you could choose. You should choose. To another other situation than being in the wine industry.
Because
No pressure at all. But I have to say I like it. I was lucky enough to spend, part of my holidays either in Ponte Canet or at Isson, so could be worse. And I was a little bit like Obelix, and I was in since my early age. So I'm to be honest, it seems to be a little bit snobbish, but in a way, I'm not really thinking that I'm working. It's a real pleasure. It's a pleasure to be, during this lockdown. It was a great pleasure to be in the vineyard, to walk in the vineyard, to be outside, to look at the vines and everything. So it's really, I would say, a kind of passion. It's not work. It's not. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah. It's very interesting. You say that your father wanted you to pursue another sort of alternative career because he didn't see maybe that there was going to be maybe a lot of money in wine in
yeah,
Bordeaux.
Because when he was a wine merchant, it was the bad period of the dark period of the Bordeaux crisis and everything. So as a wine merchant, it was very difficult to sell. The wine were difficult. So he saw that it was probably better to sell even the properties because it's becoming difficult for a family business to face now the pressure of big groups like insurance company, like banks, like all those kinds of people that are trying to buy now the major estates in the Bordeaux region. So it's always something which is special when you could still remain a family business.
Yeah.
And I think I have to say I'm proud that we still could keep it in the family.
Yeah, and I read, is it Marcel Ducasse was a influential person for you?
Do you want me to speak a little bit like Marcel? When Emmanuel, you are a little bit too energetic for me now.
No, I have to say it was a real pleasure because when I started to travel, and that's a true story, I came and see one of the major wine merchants in Bordeaux and said, okay, I will not say I want to discover the world, but I would like to promote my wine. Could you organize a tour in the US for me? And the answer was very strict. Well, Emmanuel, sorry to say so, but you are not parkerized. So you need to find other estates that are a little bit parkerized, or that at that time Robert Parker liked. And by a total coincidence, we had a dinner at Rosenségla when just after the Wertheimer bought the estate, and they just invite some enologists to taste perfumes, and some of their specialists in the perfume company to taste different kind of wines.
From Chanel.
Yeah, at Chanel, and it was an evening at Rosan, and as a neighbor we were invited. My father was unable to come, so I went there, and I was sitting next to this guy, older than me, of course, in charge of Chateau Lagrange, with a big beard and talking like this, and that's how I met Marcel Ducasse for the first time, and then. I was a little bit shy. I told him, may I visit Chateau Lagrange in the week to come? And said,
You need to call me first, but yes, you may come whenever you want.
And then I came and visited Chateau Lagrange, and it was, I would say, in the mid-90s, where Lagrange was on his, after 10 years of renovation, was really the well-known name of Saint-Julien at that time. And again, I asked him after the visit, well, would you be interested if we could do a tour together in the US? And that's how the story starts. And for quite, I would say, 10 years, we try to travel together, and we have a lot of very funny stories. He was a completely Air France addict. At that time, I was flying BA, so we always try to match the timing, but I refused to fly with Air France, and he was against flying BA. So we always have a big issues about how we could travel. But
so what were you doing at Lagrange? What was your role?
Sorry?
What were you doing at Lagrange? What was your?
I was doing nothing, but I mean, we organized joint tasting, as we were two third classified growers, one from Saint-Julien, the other one from Margaux, one with a huge production Lagrange, around 35,000 cases a year, whereas Issan is only 10,000. So no real competition between us. Just we were friends. We became friends, even there is a huge difference of age in between us, but I have to say I learned a lot, especially about the techniques and the technology and the science around the wine industry, because Marcel Ducasse was, before being in charge of Lagrange, he was a scientist. So he is an enologist. He was also an engineer. So I have to say I learned a lot. Coming from a low background, I learned a lot on the spot with him. Yeah. And it was easy because at that time he was part of those kind of technical managers that were, no bullshit at all. You could really exchange friendly about the results of your harvest, the natural degrees of the grapes. No bullshit again. It was really clear and honest, and that was very pleasant to have this kind of exchange in between us.
Yeah, it should be. I actually I did a big vertical of Lagrange last year, which is I'm going to publish quite soon. So it'd be quite interesting to go back and.
Yeah, but and we have plenty of very funny experience together in the States, in Asia, the only country where we were unable to go together was in Japan, because in fact, as you know, Lagrange belongs to a Japanese company, and Suntory, they really don't want him to come to make any promotion in Japan, because Japan was their private country, so they no French into their business in Japan. So it was the only country where we only went together once in Japan. It was during the first Vinexpo Tokyo in, I think, 2001 or 1999. I don't remember exactly the year, but it was the only time.
Yeah. Let's just have a conversation about Chateau d'Isson now. Can you? It's one of the most sort of beautiful estates in Bordeaux. Can you tell me about, because it's got an amazing history?
Yeah, I think, and especially, I think the history of Isson is really linked with UK, as you could remember, because if we trust the historical books, part of the wine that were, produced around the Chateau d'Isson, that was called at that time La Motte Cantenac, were served at the royal wedding of Aliénor of Aquitaine and Henri Plantagenet, who became Henry II, King of England. So in a way, we have this historical link, and so the building that you are showing right now, the chateau itself, belongs to the 16th or 17th century. But what is also very interesting is our original vineyard is linked. Well, I mean, you have a big wall all around, and this wall, what we say kind of clos, a little bit like in Burgundy, is dating from 1644, so way before the 1855 classification, means that the heart of the terroir and the wine that were produced in this clos finally never changed, and that's, in terms of history, I think it's very important to notice that it's one of the very few estates where the vineyard is surrounded by a big stone wall. And also in terms of history, more recently, Isson was the wine that really pleased to the François Joseph, the Emperor of Austria, and he gave the motto at that time of which is Regum Mensis Aisque Deorum, for the table of kings and Altara of gods. It seems to be very pretentious, but again, we are not responsible of it, but we are very proud to use it. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And so yes, it's and my grandfather bought the estate after World War II. At that time, they were also the owners of Rozan-Seglar, which is next door, as you know. And the vineyard was in very bad condition, so my grandfather bought it. My father was in charge during 30 years of all the renovation, and finally I am the third generation that is in charge of the chateau, and which is also a big difference to a few of them, is that we are still using the chateau itself as a family home during the summer season.
Man, do you mind if I just ask you briefly, because actually on Friday I've got an article on Vinous which looks at the 1945 vintage. Can you sort of describe, because the one thing I learned when I did a vertical at D'Isson was that some of the chateaus were in a really bad condition at the end of the war. And just as you said, D'Isson wasn't in a good situation. Can you just describe a little bit more how the chateau was when your father?
Well, at that time, I think there were only 3 hectares that were producing wine at Isson. Means let's say around 9 acres of vines, and even though there were no vat house at that period at Isson, so the first vintage that the family made, and especially the 45, was at that time produced at Rozan, because there were no cellars, no vat house, nothing. So, and it's only after a few years, around 52, I think, that we need to, because the family has sold Rozan in 1955. So just after finally all the renovation has been accomplished at Isson, but
yeah.
and you had the opportunity, and we, thanks to you, by the way, we all have the opportunity to taste the 45. But I don't know if you remember, but I think we have less than a case left in the private. We only have, to be honest,
6 bottles, you said,
we have only 7 bottles left. So
yeah.
now,
Yeah.
so but it's anyway, that's life.
Yeah. And can you just describe the vineyard for me? You mentioned the clos, like the soils and the vineyard and so on.
Yeah, well, first of all, we are the vineyard is based on only 2 varietals, Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. We don't have any Petit Verdot so far, and we don't have any Cabernet Franc, but we will probably have the opportunity to add a little bit of Petit Verdot next year. And yeah, as you could see on the map, the heart of the terroir is really Cabernet Sauvignon oriented, and in terms of soil and subsoil, we have of course clay and limestone, and but it's and to give you an idea, the 2019 vintage, as I mentioned to you, the blend is already made, and it's a 70% Cab and 30% Merlot. And you could see on the map that we have a dominant of Cabernet Sauvignon, and we mainly use them. And I have to say that probably also thanks to global warming, we are using more and more Cabernet Sauvignon in our blend right now.
Do you think
but I have to say that, again, going back to the previous question, thanks to Marcel Lucas, I discovered what a single vat of Petit Verdot is. As you know, in Lagrange, they have a lot of Petit Verdot in their blend. Well, generally speaking, in the estate, but sometimes in their blend. And I remember tasting some single vats during the harvest of Petit Verdot, and when Petit Verdot is ripe, it's
as Marcel Lucas used to say, it's a booster in a blend, you know, Emmanuel.
And that's right. When you are able to add this kind of varietal when it's ripe, it really adds something in a blend. So that's why I'm still waiting for next year, but I hope that we could have a little bit of Petit Verdot in our production next year.
Yeah, yeah. One really interesting map I think we'll bring up in a minute is you have different ages of vine in your vineyard as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I mentioned, I am the lucky generation, to be honest. My brother and sister and myself, we are really the lucky generation, because as I mentioned, my father was in charge of the renovation of all the vineyard, vat house, and everything. So he never, I think he was unable to really see the result of his job, because you need time. I mean, with wine and vines especially, you need a little bit of time to really reach a certain level. And yes, some of our plots are really now, some of them are around 45, 50 years old. But I think the real big step, I would say we have a first step around 2005. Mm-hmm. And then another one in terms of overall quality. I don't know if you agree with me as a critic, but I would say first step is 05, and the second one is around with a vintage 10 and probably 15, which is so-called the tremendous vintage of Margaux, generally speaking. But I think around 10 and 15, we have another step.
Yeah, I mean, I found that when we did the vertical together, and subscribers to Vinous can read this article. It's on the website. But I did find there were steps of improvement, and they're mainly recent, as you say, 05 and 10. I saw a real change in the style of Disson.
And I have to say, since even 15, now we hired a real, I would say, chef de culture, which is really in charge of the viticulture itself. And I'm proud to say that even in a vintage like 2018, when we all suffer from mildew and a lot of disease, it was not an easy vintage to make. The situation of the vineyard were very healthy and well, as healthy as it could be due to the situation, but we were really part of the very nice vineyard to see at that time, and I think it helps everything start in the vineyards. So that's for sure.
Yeah.
But
have you made any changes in the vineyard in recent years that you think has improved the wine?
I think in terms of we have a complete new drainage system since the end of the 90s, and of course it needs a little bit of time before it gets in action, if I may say. But also I think we are much more careful about the vines themselves, in terms of healthy conditions, in terms of pruning, in terms of and also I think we are a little bit more precise in our selection in terms of plots when we decide to pick the grapes. It's a little bit more scientific in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was a kid, I remember when I was with my father walking in the vineyards, the only way to decide how to pick the grapes was just tasting the grapes and said, okay, is it nice to taste? Is it sugary? Is it a little bit acidic? So, okay, let's go and move. Nowadays, you have many different analyses. And also, I have to say that due to a more severe selection, because we since mid-90s, we were late on the market of the second wine at that time. But the selection is mainly based on the age of the vine. So that's why we try to keep the oldest vines for the blend of the first wine and use the young vines for the second wine, which is Blason. And again, it's a little bit linked to what I've said. The first vintage of Blason officially is 95, but we have made a try in 94, and with the help of the famous Médoc enologist that you all know, Eric. Well, Jacques Boisseau at that time, then his son Eric. We are really much more precise in terms of selection, and again based on the age of the vine. So I think it's really helpful.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask one question, just coming back a little bit. You said about when you choose to pick the grapes, and you can use science or you can go into the vineyards and taste the grapes. When I was talking to Marielle Cazot last week from La Concierge, she was very much taste the grapes, and that's when she decides to pick. How about you? If you taste the grapes and it's saying pick later, but your analysis is saying pick now, what do you do?
I think the analysis, the scientific part is just a kind of help to complete our personal feeling when you take the grape. And I agree with her. Unfortunately, I haven't seen your interview, but I'm quite definitely okay with them because firstly I have to say I like La Conseillante and as a wine, but I really understand what we still continue to walk in the vineyard and taste the berries. That's for sure. That's the really. But we could complete our feeling with analysis, and sometimes you think that the grapes are fine, but the analysis say maybe you need to wait a little bit. So we was and I remember in '05, for example, it's the longest harvest ever because we were tasting those. Yeah, okay, we could pick tomorrow, but weather conditions are great. Maybe we could wait 1 or 2 more days before picking. Maybe we get a better sugar level. Maybe we could get a better acidity. Maybe we could get a better anthocyane level. So the science is very helpful, but I think which is important is you still keep the decision in your hands by tasting berries. What I would say when I said at that time it was very old-fashioned. They were only tasting berries, and if it's fine, let's go for it. The Merlot first, the Cabernet then, done. Nowadays, we of course we are much more precise. We taste all the different plots, make analysis of each plot. It's much more scientific. But I agree with you and her. The real important feeling is what you have in your mouth, and if you feel it's good, and if the analysis are okay, let's go for it.
Yeah. And what changes have you made in terms of vinification in recent years? Because you've made some investments in the winery too.
Yeah, well, I think early in the just after the vintage 2000, we have decided to change all the vat house to have vats that were really linked with each plot. So to have a kind of more technical also vat house. I have to say that my father has built a stainless steel vat house with 18 vats at that time. And when we have decided to make a new one in the early 2001, we tried to have 36 vats, very small ones, and medium vats, big ones, to try to respect the identity of each plot, to try to respect the in a way the style of our wine, and to be a little bit more precise, to be able to vinify on separate side. So, but nothing really new, except that it was another step for us. You have to keep in mind that up until the 80s, the idea in Issan was to produce wine for the Cruse firm, for the wine merchant company. The idea was not only to try to make the best wine possible, but the more wine for the wine merchant company. And so we have to change our policy slowly but surely, and make investments maybe a little bit later than some of our neighbors. But that's why we arrived late on the market of the second wine. The selection was decided a little bit late compared to I don't know, maybe Bran or Giscourt or some of our dear friends around us, or Rosan. But slowly but surely again we are back, I think, in the competition.
Yeah. I want to just open the conversation up a little bit. We had one question from Marielle Lowe, who said, say hi from his Dutch hockey friend Xavier.
Exactly, yeah. Okay.
But that's a good question. We were talking earlier. I mean, it's something that a few of us are talking about at the moment. Bordeaux Prima. What happens this year? What's your idea?
Well, I was interviewed by the French newspaper Le Figaro early March, when just before the lockdown, and the situation, we could really feel that the situation was getting worse and worse. And I'm still thinking that we need to do a future campaign. That's for sure. I mean, it's important for all the chateaus. It's the specificity of Bordeaux. But now we have also to respect and to see how the situation is getting in our major market. US, of course, Asia on the other side, but also in the important European market. UK is one of them, Netherlands, the Scandinavian countries, and the situation is, you have two ways of thinking. One is we need to do business, so now the people are ready to buy wine, or that's what we heard in some countries, that people are ready to buy if the price are going to be fair. And the other point of view is to say, okay, the situation is incredible. People are still locked down in the US, locked down in UK, not so good situation in South Asian countries. So maybe we need to give a little bit more time to the business. And why don't we wait up until September, October? To be honest, I have no idea. Well, my first feeling in March was, we need to respect our clients. We need to respect and not to be arrogant, and probably wait up until September. But now I will be pragmatic. If all the wine merchants, and especially UK for us is very important, because it's one of our, it was up to last year our first export market. It's either US or UK. In 2019, US was first, UK too, so it's more or less the same. But if all our dear friends, wine merchants in UK said, okay, now let's go, we need to buy wine, we need to offer wine to our clients, I will be very pragmatic, let's go for it. But, it's difficult to see and to have a clear view of what will happen in 2 weeks or months.
I suppose one question, I mean, it's a difficult question, is like, say the Prima does go ahead, do you price the wines according to the quality of the vintage or according to the state of the world? That's the difficult question.
I think, to be honest, we have no choice. And well, I mean, when I say we have no choice, if we want to sell, we need to probably to fix the price according to the global economic situation. Because, okay, we could stay at the, say, well, everything is fine. We are so proud to have made a great vintage, which is true, it's a great vintage, but maybe we will sell it as a much lower price than average or medium vintage, because the situation is like it is. And you could not say, okay, you could not be blind. I mean, US is in very bad condition in terms of lockdown. People are dying. In Europe, it's not a good situation. France is a very bad situation in terms of global economy. So the good question is, are people ready to buy bottles of wine early July? If 80% of the answer is yes, let's go for it. Otherwise, it will probably not be better in September, but we have a little bit more time for you, the critics, to taste the wine, for some of our distributors to maybe have a chance to taste the wine. So far, to be honest, we have probably around 60 distributors in Bordeaux. Before the lockdown, I've seen 3 of them tasting barrel samples here. So, okay, keep cool. And if we have to sell in 3 months, is it a big deal? I don't think so. But again, let's be pragmatic. If the campaign will start with the first grows in 2 or 3 weeks, maybe we will follow. I don't know. But I'm well, again, when people said sometimes, well, we could compare with the economic crisis of 2008, Lehman Brothers and everything. No, I don't think so. Lehman Brothers was, yeah, you have an economic crisis, but very small compared to what is happening now. And on the top of it, people are dying. In a way, people are dying. Okay, it's a shame, but you could not be, you could not make it like nothing happens. We are not in a normal situation. So again, let's be pragmatic. If there is any option that we could use to sell wine in June, July, okay, why not? If we need to wait up to September or October, we need to wait too. There is
one of our viewers said, and it's a good point. Tim said, would you consider not releasing any wine this year at all and waiting till the Prima in 2021?
I think that will be dangerous also for the economic situation of the chateaus. Honestly, quite the major classified grows will survive, but not all of them. So I think it's the worst case not to do any campaign. Because again, that never happens in Bordeaux. So I think we need to make one. We need to be very clear about our price policy. I think we need to respect what happens in the world so far, but we need to make. I think it could be dangerous for part of the classified grows if there is no future campaign in 2019. But who knows, maybe if we are going to be locked down again early June, you could forget definitely a campaign before the summer. So it will be probably September, October. And if the virus starts again at that time, well, forget it. But I think if we could, it would be much better to do one campaign, even if it's a more selective, even if it's a more specific one on classified grows, because really it's a great vintage, and we could also have some clients that are when we call some of our distributors in Hong Kong, or when we call some of our distributors in the US, said, okay, no, we are ready. We are selling wine every day. We are not selling only Bordeaux, but we are also selling some Bordeaux. And not only classified grows, but we are selling wine every day. So we are ready to, if the price are fair, we are ready to offer them to our clients. So you have to. So it's very difficult, because you have the position of the French distributors, you have the overseas distributors that have a different point of view. So it's difficult to be very clear, but which is definitely sure is 2019 is a very nice vintage. You will see in few days when you have your more experience some of them. But I think the vintage itself needs, if I may say, needs a campaign.
But do you think one of the criticisms of Bordeaux and the pricing is people say, is that often the new vintage is more expensive than previous vintages that are already on the market and physically available, and they're finished wines. Is that something that you think Bordeaux needs to look carefully at to motivate or to give a financial reason why consumers should buy Bordeaux Prima?
I definitely agree with you, and especially on as we are facing this terrible situation, people will definitely not be obliged to buy any bottle of wine. So the only reason why they could eventually buy, it's because the vintage is great. That's a good point. And also because it will be a good deal. If you could find other vintages, great vintages like 15, 16, 18, or even 12 on the market at the same price or below, I mean, there is no sense of buying any future, especially this year, especially because of the economic situation. So it needs to be a very attractive price. And it will not be the first time when Bordeaux is obliged to sell a great vintage with a lower price than sometimes a medium one. But again, if we want to make a campaign, we need to adjust the pricing point. That's it. And I agree. I mean, the philosophy of the future is you need to make a good deal and to buy, as you are buying 2 years in advance, you need to buy at the lower price as vintage that are available on the market. If it's the same price, it's better to buy what you could drink right now. So I think that especially this year, we need to be very careful about price, generally speaking.
Because do you feel that maybe it's the consumer that may be taking the risk at the beginning in buying Primos, because you don't know how the wine's going to be, or you don't know if it's how it's going to go up in price. And with everything happening in the world now, if you're say a restaurant just start, in this situation, putting wines away in a cellar to sell in your restaurant, it ties up a lot of money which restaurants don't have.
Yeah, I agree. I think at the end of the day, who is buying wine, or where are you drinking wine? You are drinking wine with friends at home, so it's for the regular market, and otherwise you are drinking wine in restaurants or in bars and everything. So you need to be sure that this kind of public are ready to buy, and they will be ready if they are making a good deal. If they are not making any good deal, it's better to buy a bottle of wine. On the other end, I think the situation could be also different in each different estates, because it's also depending on your stock situation, of course, with the wine merchants in France, but also with different distributors. If they have 2 or 3 years of stock,
Yeah.
why, and especially this year when the situation is so difficult from an economic point of view, why will they need to buy your wine in future? So yeah, I think but that will be interesting, because we are all agreed to say that we need to be very fairly priced. We'll see in 2 weeks or 3 weeks what will really happen. But I'm still confident that we have nowadays, thanks to all the social media, thanks to all the new techniques and technology, we could really know at what is the price level of wines in, I would say, in San Francisco or in Berlin or in Hong Kong or in London or Bristol or Copenhagen. So it's easy to see more or less at what level of price people are buying. So it's not so difficult to make the vice versa deal, and to see at what price, sorry, you need to offer the wine. But again, it's very easy to say so in front of your camera and without any pressure so far. But of course we will see it in a month. And again, I think, to be honest, nowadays, and due to the situation, lockdown in different countries and everything, the important thing is make sure that the wine merchants, the critics, are able to taste the wine, and then let's try to see if we are able to sell it normally now. If there is no option, no possibility to sell it, it's better to wait, not be arrogant. You don't need to force people to buy. Wait a little bit. Maybe it will be, you have better options in September or October. But again, I have no official clue. So
yeah. Just want to just ask a sort of couple of just sort of general question, really simple question that everybody always asks. But I mean, what's the greatest bottle of wine you've ever drunk?
Sorry,
what's the best bottle of wine that you have drunk? Do you have a memorable bottle, and where were you and who were you with?
I've told you that I have this my first bottle of I think it's always linked to a special situation, and my first memory of a great first grows was when I was 17, working in Bristol with John Avery, and again for dinner we had a magnum of 1964 Chateau Latour, and it was the first time for me I ever tasted Latour. On the other side, despite Lagrange and Friends wine, when I was young, my father was very close to the owner of Léoville Lascaz, Mr. Delon, Michel Delon, Jean-Hubert father, and they have made some exchange of cases every year. So I grew up with Lascaz. So Lascaz is part of the wine that I like in Saint-Julien, like Saint-Pierre, which is I think a very nice wine too, because it's also linked to the personality of the owner. I have a great respect for Jean-Louis Trillo, and I like the guy, and so I like his wine. I like Pontet Canet because when I was a kid, I was used to walk in the field there, so it's always linked to, and more recently outside Bordeaux, thanks to Christian Silly, I have discovered the joy of nice vintage port, and I'm now completely addict. We were talking about the Bordeaux left bank, but I have to confess that Figeac is one of my favorite wine on the right bank too, because when I was again 15 years old, I used to spend some weekends at Chateau Canon, because the Fournier family, previous owner of Canon, were good friends. And once we went visiting Figeac, and Thierry Manoncourt, the owner at that time, we were two young kids, 15 years old, made the tour himself, and he said, well, you are, I know your family, I know your father very well, you are from the left bank, but you need to drink real wine. And he gave me a bottle of 75 Figeac, and I keep this bottle for years and years. And it's you have always some of history or good feelings linked. And to be back with Marcel Lucas when we were traveling together, as we were drinking Isson, Lagrange, Isson during all the official winemaker dinners, tasting, blah, blah, blah. When we had the lunch free or dinner free, we always try wines from other countries, and I have to say, thanks to him, I discover, you know, Catena Zapata, for example, from Argentina, different types of wine that I was not used to.
Yeah.
So it's always difficult to say this is my favorite wine, because if I say so, I will be killed in 10 minutes time by all the other chateau owners from the area. But to be honest, it's always linked to, again, I have a very good memory of the sun coming out, coming on the Pyrenees chain at 7:30, 8 a.m. Early October, and having a very nice bottle of Chateau de Fargue and just fresh bread and a little bit of foie gras. 8 a.m. facing the mountains. Well, it's
Perfect.
that's a huge memory.
Actually, one Sid Cross asked, which quality vintage of Chateau d'Isson has surprised you the most in terms of its evolution in bottle?
That's a very tricky question. Well, I will try to be. First of all, one of my favorite vintage is 2010, because I get married in 2010, so I officially always need to say 2010, otherwise my wife will kill me. That's done. So no, more seriously, I think, you know, I have a special feeling with the 01 vintage, because nobody paid attention to 2001. It was just after 2000, a famous vintage, blah, blah, blah. But from technical point of view, I think 2001 in a lot of different cases is better than 2000. And especially in the 2001 of Disson, there is something special on the nose that I never get in other vintage. And it's something that is maybe a little bit in the 2019, but it reminds me the nose of, for example, of some of the Figeac wines. That's very funny, because it's a comparison that I've always made. And then I think classical vintage like 05 and 15 are great also, but 15 you need to wait for it. 05 you could start drinking it, it's pleasant to drink. So, you know, it's really depending on, for me as I will not say winemaker, but chateau owner, it's very difficult to pick one vintage. And again, if I have to, I will definitely pick 2010, not to be in trouble at all.
Yeah. One final question. I remember a few years ago you asked whether I could DJ. I think it was for La Fête de la Fleur or something like that. My question to you, Emmanuel, is what song gets you onto the dance floor? What would I have to play for you to be dancing?
That's a good question. Well, I'm very eclectic for music. I like. I have to say that I'm Queen generation, but I also enjoy David Bowie, and the song for our wedding was Live on Mars. From Bowie. You know, it's funny story again. When I was a kid, Supertramp came and had dinner at Chateau d'Isson. I was 10 years old at that time. They made a big concert in Bordeaux, and at that time they were looking for a place to have a private dinner before the concert, and they arrived at Chateau d'Isson. And you know, my father was mad of classical music. Isson is considered you know, we have a lot of artists that came in the past for classical music, and he had seen those guys with big beards and everything, super Trump. He was completely afraid of this kind of people, and they finally gave him 20 tickets for the and I remember all my cousins coming at home, receiving the tickets to go for free to the Supertramp concert in Bordeaux. And at the end of the day, only 2 tickets remained, so I was very pleased. I said, one of them will bring me to the concert hall, and no, I stayed at home, and my father and mother, they were completely out of this kind of music, were able to go to the concert. So it's again, it's a funny story, and but well, yeah, yes, Queen, Supertramp. Well,
I'll know
David
what to
Bowie.
play.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
one
I
day
think.
I DJ again, maybe I'll play some Queen or something.
No, but I am old-fashioned guy. I like to dance with somebody, not alone. So all this kind of music will be fine with me. So
Okay. Well, Emmanuel, thank you very much for speaking to us this evening. It's been
no,
really
thank you for your
fascinating.
time. And if she still hear me, I just want to say hello to my dear friend from Amsterdam, Xavier and Marielle. He is a wine merchant in Netherlands, and we had a great time together when we were young. So it's
And I should
always
also
pleasant. And of course, to all of you, as soon as the lockdown will be ended, and probably as soon as we go back to visit Chateau d'Isson, and we will be more than happy to see all of you back, because finally we are a little bit alone right now. So
thank you. And also, before we go, I have one message to say.
yeah.
I must say happy birthday to my mum, because she's 70 today. So
So
mum, if you're still watching.
happy birthday, Madame Martin.
Emmanuel, thank you very much.
So, thank you, Neil. Thank you, and enjoy your tasting.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.